Picture this. You won a landslide election victory. You've got a massive parliamentary majority. You're the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and you should be enjoying the political equivalent of a victory lap. Instead, barely 18 months into your tenure, one of Britain's most respected political broadcasters goes on national radio and essentially says your authority is shot to hell and compares you to an abandoned ship floating on a sea of discontent close to anarchy. That's not just a bad day at the office. That's a political evisceration. Welcome to Keir Starmer's nightmare before Christmas, courtesy of Andrew Neil, who just delivered a verbal demolition so thorough it should come with a safety warning. Quick favor, if you're loving this, hit that subscribe button and smash that notification bell. Over 94% of viewers haven't yet. It's free, takes a second, and means a world to us. Cheers if you did. Now back to the show. Andrew Neil, for those who might not be familiar, isn't just some random commentator shouting into the void on social media. This is a man who has interviewed every prime minister since Margaret Thatcher, who has built a reputation for asking the questions politicians desperately wish would go away, and who has a kind of political instinct that comes from decades of watching governments rise and spectacularly fall. When Andrew Neil says your authority is shot, that's not hyperbole or clickbait. That's a considered professional assessment from someone who's seen more political careers crash and burn than most of us have had hot dinners. Speaking on Times Radio, Neil didn't just criticize Starmer. He systematically dismantled the Prime Minister's position with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely cannot believe what they are witnessing. His opening salvo was absolutely brutal. He said, and I quote, "I have never seen a breakdown in the discipline of a government like this. Never. And remember, this is someone who covered the dying days of John Major's government when Conservative MPs were practically fighting each other in the corridors, who watched Gordon Brown's administration implode, who observed Theresa May's cabinet turn into something resembling a particularly dysfunctional reality television program." For Andrew Neil to say he has never seen anything like this is a political equivalent of a seasoned firefighter looking at a blaze and saying this is properly out of control. But Neil wasn't finished warming up. He went on to say that as we head toward Christmas and into the new year, Keir Starmer's authority within his own party is shot to hell. Not damaged, not weakened, not slightly compromised, but shot to hell. And then came the killer blow. When asked how Starmer could recover from this, Neil's response was chillingly simple. You don't. You can't get it back. That's not political commentary. That's a political obituary being written in real time. It's the equivalent of a doctor looking at your x-rays and saying, "I've got some bad news." So what exactly has triggered this absolutely devastating assessment? Well, it all revolves around Labour's bizarre dance with the idea of rejoining a customs union with the European Union. Now, here's where it gets properly ridiculous. This policy option was explicitly, clearly, unambiguously ruled out in Labour's election manifesto. You know, that document that parties publish before elections that's supposed to tell voters what they're actually going to do if elected? The thing that's meant to be, at minimum, a rough guide to your intentions? Apparently, that manifesto is now about as relevant as last year's Christmas wrapping paper. Keir Starmer himself has said on the record, not once but twice this month, that Labour is not pursuing a customs union with the EU. Twice, in the same month. You'd think that would be fairly definitive, wouldn't you? The Prime Minister has spoken. The matter is settled. Everyone moves on. But no. Instead, senior Labour figures have been making front-page news by directly contradicting him, floating the customs union idea as though the Prime Minister's position is merely a suggestion rather than party policy. It's a political equivalent of your employees publicly discussing how they're going to do exactly the opposite of what you just told them to do, except instead of getting fired, they are apparently allowed to just carry on. Neil absolutely skewered this breakdown in collective cabinet responsibility. For those unfamiliar with the concept, collective cabinet responsibility is basically the principle that once the cabinet makes a decision, everyone publicly supports it, even if they argued against it in private. It's how governments maintain a unified front and actually govern effectively. When that breaks down, when ministers start publicly contradicting each other and the Prime Minister, you don't have a government. You have a debating society with nuclear codes. The fact that this is happening over customs union membership makes it even more absurd because, as Neil pointed out with delicious precision, it's one of the most stupid economic policies anybody could propose. And Neil isn't exactly known for pulling his punches, but calling it one of the most stupid policies is quite something. He laid out exactly why with the kind of clarity that makes you wonder why anyone's even considering it. Rejoining a customs union, Neil explained, would require the UK to abandon independent trade deals with key global partners. All those agreements that were negotiated after Brexit with countries around the world? Gone. Binned. Worthless. The UK would have to accept EU trade law and European Court of Justice jurisdiction without having any influence over those laws or that jurisdiction because we wouldn't actually be in the EU anymore. It's all the constraints of EU membership without any of the benefits or the ability to shape policy. It's like agreeing to follow all your ex-partner's rules for how you live your life except you're not even together anymore and they won't listen to anything you have to say about those rules. And after accepting all of that, after giving up independent trade policy and submitting to EU legal jurisdiction, what's the economic benefit? According to Neil, close to zero. Close to zero. Imagine telling someone, give up your autonomy, follow rules you can't influence, abandon agreements you've already made, and in return, you'll get basically nothing. It's possibly the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals, and that's including whatever Brexit was supposed to be. Neil contrasted this ridiculous halfway house with the option of actually fully rejoining the European Union. Now, Neil's not advocating for that, but his point is brilliant. He said if Labour wants to rejoin the EU, they should say so openly, have that debate honestly with the British public, and put it back to the people. At least that would be a coherent position. At least you could have an honest national conversation about whether Brexit was a mistake and whether we should reverse it. Instead, what we're getting is this bizarre limbo where Labour seems to want some of the constraints of EU membership without any of the benefits, and different senior figures can't even agree on whether they want that or not. But here's where Neil's analysis gets really interesting. He didn't just critique the policy, he analyzed what it means politically. He linked this policy rebellion to internal leadership maneuvering, suggesting that senior Labour figures are positioning themselves for a challenge to Starmer's leadership. Not after the local elections, not after waiting to see how things develop, but right now. And Neil asked the absolutely killer question, why do this now? Why make these challenges to his authority at this moment? Think about the implications of that question. We're barely 18 months into a Labour government with a massive majority. Under normal circumstances, this should be the honeymoon period, the time when the party is unified, when everyone's still riding high on election victory, when internal disagreements are kept firmly behind closed doors. Instead, we've got senior figures openly contradicting the Prime Minister on major policy issues. That's not normal political jostling. That's a sign that people within the party think Starmer is so weak that they can publicly undermine him without consequence. Neil's description of Starmer as the most unpopular Prime Minister since record began is particularly damning because it's not just opinion, it's backed by polling data. Starmer's approval ratings have collapsed faster than a souffle in an earthquake. For a Prime Minister who won such a huge majority, to become this unpopular this quickly is almost an achievement in itself. It suggests a fundamental disconnect between what the public thought they were getting and what they've actually received. And then came Neil's final flourish, the metaphor that perfectly encapsulates the current situation. He described Starmer's leadership as drifting, like an abandoned ship floating on a sea of Labour discontent and close to anarchy. An abandoned ship. Not a ship that's lost its way, not a ship that's taking on water, but an abandoned ship. That implies the crew has already given up, that they've taken to the lifeboats and left the vessel to its fate. It's one of the most brutal political metaphors I've heard in years, and it's devastatingly accurate. What makes this entire situation so politically fascinating is that it reveals several fundamental problems with Starmer's leadership. First, there's a manifesto issue. If your own cabinet ministers feel comfortable publicly advocating for policies that directly contradict what you put in your election manifesto, and what you said multiple times is not happening, that suggests they don't fear you. In politics, respect and a degree of fear are essential for maintaining authority. Not fear in a tyrannical sense, but fear of consequences, fear of being demoted or sacked, fear of damaging your career. If that fear doesn't exist, if ministers think they can publicly contradict you without repercussions, your authority evaporates. Second, there's a question of political judgment. How did Starmer let it get to this point? How did the breakdown in discipline become so severe that Andrew Neil is talking about anarchy? Good leaders spot trouble early and address it before it becomes public. The fact that these disputes are playing out in newspaper headlines rather than being resolved privately suggests either Starmer isn't aware of the dissent, which would make him oblivious, or is aware and can't stop it, which would make him powerless. Neither option is flattering. Third, there's a policy incoherence. The customs union debate is emblematic of a broader problem. What exactly does Starmer's Labour Party stand for? What's the vision? If senior figures can't even agree on fundamental questions about Britain's relationship with the European Union, what hope is there for coherent policy on anything else? Voters might forgive many things, but they struggle with leaders who appear to have no clear direction. The timing of Neil's intervention is also significant. This isn't coming after a major political scandal or a devastating election defeat. This is happening during what should be the relatively calm period leading up to Christmas. If the government is as chaotic when there's no immediate crisis, what happens when something genuinely serious occurs? How does a prime minister shoot an authority rally during an international emergency or economic crisis? What's also remarkable is the contrast with previous governments. Yes, John Major had rebellious backbenchers over Europe,